History often remembers generals for the words they shouted, speeches delivered before battle, orders barked over radios, boasts recorded by journalists. But sometimes, the most revealing moments leave no sound at all. Sometimes, history speaks through silence. In October 1944, two of the most famous generals of the Second World War were bound together by an event neither could escape. One died under orders from his own regime. The other heard the news and said nothing. No outburst, no reflection, no recorded reaction of any kind. This is not a story about what was said. It is a story about what was not. October 14, 1944. Lorraine, France. Lieutenant General George S. Patton sat inside his Third Army headquarters as rain hammered relentlessly against the countryside outside. The once open roads of France had dissolved into thick, sucking mud. Tanks stalled, trucks bogged down. Men fought not just the enemy, but the earth itself. The Moselle River stood like a wall in Patton's path, swollen and uncooperative, while the ancient fortress city of Metz refused to break. Assault after assault had failed. The lightning advance that had stunned Europe in August, the dash that had carried American armor across France at breathtaking speed, had come to a grinding halt in Lorraine's blood-soaked fields. An aide entered with routine intelligence summaries. German unit locations, ammunition shortages, casualty figures, weather forecasts grim enough to kill any optimism. There was nothing in those papers about Erwin Rommel. According to every surviving record, Patton received no immediate notice of Rommel's death that day. He issued no statement. He wrote nothing in his diary. He made no remark to his staff that anyone later remembered or thought important enough to record. And yet this is the story of what Patton said when Rommel died, and what he did not say. It is a story about silence, about why that silence exists, and what it reveals about two legendary commanders whose lives never truly crossed, yet remained strangely connected. At approximately 12:30 p.m. German time on October 14, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel died inside a car traveling along a quiet road near Herrlingen, Germany. His death was officially recorded as suicide. In reality, it was a killing carried out by the Nazi regime under the thinnest veil of choice. According to testimony later given by his son, Manfred Rommel, and corroborated by other witnesses, two generals arrived at Rommel's home that morning, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Meisel, emissaries from Berlin. They informed Rommel that he had been implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He was presented with three options, each one catastrophic. He could stand trial before the People's Court, a proceeding that guaranteed conviction, public humiliation, execution, and the arrest of his family. He could refuse cooperation and be arrested immediately, with the same consequences. Or he could take cyanide, die quietly, and allow Hitler to announce that Rommel had finally succumbed to wounds suffered months earlier in an Allied air attack. The final option spared his family. It preserved his reputation. It granted him a state funeral. Rommel chose the poison. He explained the situation to his wife and his 15-year-old son. He dressed in his Afrika Korps jacket, the uniform of his greatest victories. He picked up his field marshal's baton, the symbol of everything he had achieved. Then he entered the car with the two men who had delivered his death sentence. 15 minutes later, he was dead. On October 15th, the German government announced Rommel's death to the world. The statement was carefully crafted, precise in its deception. According to Berlin, the Desert Fox had finally died from the head injuries he suffered on July 17th when Allied aircraft strafed his staff car in Normandy, wounds that had worsened over months. Hitler declared a national day of mourning. Rommel was granted a full state funeral. The German people were told their greatest general had died a hero's death, succumbing to injuries received in combat against the enemy. The truth, that Rommel had been eliminated by his own government for suspected disloyalty, remained locked away among a small circle of Nazi officials. Some German officers immediately sensed something was wrong. Allied intelligence officers were skeptical as well. But publicly and officially, Rommel died of war wounds. That was the story. And that was the story Patton heard. As far as available records show, Patton believed the propaganda version like everyone else. He did not know Rommel had been forced into suicide. He did not know about the ultimatum. He did not know Rommel had been killed to prevent him from becoming a symbol of resistance, and still, he said nothing. There is no statement from Patton acknowledging Rommel's death in any military archive examined by historians. There is no diary entry from October 14 or 15 mentioning Rommel, despite the fact that Patton kept an unusually detailed journal throughout the war. He wrote obsessively about battles, superiors, rivals, politics, weather, even his own frustrations and ambitions. In October 1944, his diary was filled with Lorraine, rain, mud, supply shortages, Metz. His fury at being forced into slow, attritional warfare instead of the mobile operations he loved and excelled at. Rommel's death does not appear, not once. Patton's letters are equally silent. He wrote frequently to his wife, Beatrice, often pouring out his thoughts in remarkable detail. He wrote to fellow generals. He filed official correspondence up the chain of command. In all surviving collections from October and November 1944, Rommel's name does not appear, nor do Patton's staff officers recall any reaction. Many later wrote memoirs or gave interviews describing Patton's moods and outbursts in vivid detail. None remembered him commenting on Rommel's death. His press officer recorded public remarks and press briefings, as was standard. Patton made no comment to journalists following Third Army. This absence is remarkable, because silence was not Patton's nature. Patton was famously outspoken, profane, opinionated. He spoke freely about nearly everything: strategy, soldiers, allies, enemies, politics, even destiny itself. His speeches became legendary. His diary overflowed with judgment and emotion. Those who knew him well said he rarely concealed his thoughts. Yet on Rommel's death, there is nothing. That silence is total. And it forces an uncomfortable question: why? To understand it, we must understand Patton and Rommel, and the relationship they never truly had. Despite popular imagination, fueled largely by the 1970 film Patton, these two generals never fought each other. They never faced one another across a battlefield. They never commanded opposing forces in the same engagement. Rommel commanded the Africa Corps from February 1941 until March 1943. Patton arrived in North Africa in November 1942, leading American forces during Operation Torch. After the disaster at Kasserine Pass, Patton assumed command in early March 1943. Rommel left Africa on March 9th, ordered back to Germany by Hitler. Patton took command just 3 days earlier. For 3 days, they existed in the same theater, technically capable of meeting in battle. They never did. Patton's offensive began after Rommel had already departed. The Germans he defeated were commanded by others. They never fought, but they knew each other by reputation. Rommel was aware of Patton through German intelligence, which viewed him as the most dangerous American general. German planners believed Patton would lead the main Allied invasion, evidence of the respect he commanded. Patton, in turn, studied Rommel's career. He knew Rommel's writings. He respected his aggressive, mobile style. He spoke openly of wanting to defeat him, to prove American armor could match German armor. That duel never came. And when Rommel died, Patton, who had once hoped to measure himself against the Desert Fox, left no words behind, only silence. Patton's path through the war never truly intersected with Rommel's. In 1943, Patton commanded the 7th Army during the Sicilian campaign, driving his forces hard across the island in a bitter, unspoken race against Bernard Montgomery. Later that year, after being sidelined by the infamous slapping incidents, Patton was temporarily removed from frontline command, his future uncertain. Rommel, meanwhile, spent part of 1943 in Italy, inspecting coastal defenses and preparing for the Allied invasion everyone knew was inevitable. After that, he was sent to France to take command of Army Group B, tasked with defending the Atlantic Wall against the coming storm. According to military records, Rommel remained in Normandy from late 1943 until July 17, 1944, when Allied aircraft strafed his staff car, leaving him critically wounded. Patton did not arrive in Normandy until late July, brought over specifically to take command of Third Army, after the breakout from the beaches had already begun. Third Army became operational on August 1, 1944, launching what would become the Great Armored Surge across France. By that point, Rommel was already confined to a hospital, recovering from injuries that would permanently remove him from command. He never returned to the front. Once again, the two generals occupied the same theater at nearly the same time, but never faced one another. Patton's famous dash across France, the advance that stunned Allied commanders and terrified the German high command. took place after Rommel was already out of the war. The German generals opposing Patton in August and September were others, competent men, but none with Rommel's reputation or skill. Patton knew this. Intelligence summaries kept Third Army informed of which German commanders they faced. They knew Rommel had been wounded in July. They knew he was no longer directing operations. He was not there. This matters when we consider Patton's silence in October. On paper, Patton and Rommel looked like destined rivals. Both were aggressive armored commanders. Both clashed with their superiors. Both cultivated larger-than-life public images. Both were idolized by their troops and feared by their enemies. Journalists portrayed them as natural opposites, commanders cut from the same cloth on opposing sides of history. Soldiers talked about them that way too, wondering who would win if they ever met in battle. But they never did. They never commanded opposing forces in the same engagement. They never tested their doctrines against each other. They never exchanged messages, letters, or communications of any kind. According to American and German archival records, there was no personal or professional contact between them, official or unofficial. They were famous generals fighting the same war, but they were not connected by experience. That reality makes Patton's silence easier to understand. When Rommel died, Patton had no personal bond, no shared battlefield memory, no rivalry forged under fire. Rommel was, from Patton's perspective, simply another German general, one already removed from the fight. But there was more at work than distance. In October 1944, Patton's mind was consumed by Metz. That ancient fortress city sat directly in his path, blocking his advance toward Germany. And according to Patton's own diary and official records, October was among the most frustrating months of his entire war. After the breathtaking success of August, when Third Army liberated vast stretches of France at a pace no one thought possible, the advance had stalled. The reason was not German brilliance but logistics. Fuel, ammunition, trucks, roads. Third Army had outrun its supply lines. Gasoline shortages left tanks idle. Ammunition was rationed. Food supplies were tight. And worse still, Patton's army was deprioritized. Other Allied forces, especially Montgomery's, were favored for supplies as Eisenhower committed to a northern thrust. On September 25th, Patton was ordered to halt and go on the defensive. He despised the order. Patton believed stopping meant surrendering initiative. He believed it gave the enemy time to recover. In his diary, he railed against what he saw as wasted opportunity. Defense, to Patton, was stagnation, and stagnation was death. So he focused on Metz. The city was a massive fortress complex along the Moselle River, ringed by enormous German-built forts dating back to the late 19th century. It could not be ignored. Patton chose to attack it directly, overruling staff officers who urged bypassing the city and isolating it instead. Patton believed leaving a strong garrison in his rear was dangerous. More than that, he believed in attacking, always attacking. Momentum mattered. Aggression mattered. Spirit mattered. On October 3rd, Third Army launched its assault. The attack on Fort Driant quickly turned into a nightmare. American forces were unprepared for fortress warfare. They lacked intelligence on the fort's layout. They lacked specialized equipment. German defenders fired from positions the attackers didn't even know existed. Casualties mounted. Progress vanished. After 10 days of brutal fighting, Patton ordered the assault suspended on October 13th. It was the only outright defeat of his career, a fact that weighed heavily on him. Fort Driant would not fall until December, long after Third Army had moved on. This was Patton's reality on October 14, 1944. He was grappling with failure, with stalled momentum, with rain that turned Lorraine into a swamp. The Moselle overflowed its banks, vehicles bogged down, men slogged forward through mud and blood. Casualties climbed relentlessly. More than 1,200 killed in October, over 6,000 wounded, nearly 1,000 missing. This was not the war Patton loved. This was not the war he was built for, and it consumed him. Rommel's death, announced through German newspapers and radio broadcasts, was just another piece of distant news, significant perhaps to historians, but irrelevant to Patton's immediate struggle. There was another reason for his silence. The truth about Rommel's death was not known. At the time, the world believed the official German account, that Rommel had died from wounds suffered in July. The Nazi regime controlled the narrative completely. A state funeral was held on October 18th. Hitler sent condolences. Senior commanders praised Rommel's sacrifice. It was all propaganda, but it worked. The truth emerged only after the war, when Rommel's son and other witnesses came forward. Documents surfaced, accounts aligned. By the late 1940s and 1950s, the world understood what had happened. But in October 1944, Patton knew none of this, so he said nothing. And that silence, the absence of words, the lack of reaction, is the historical record. Years later, Patton occasionally mentioned Rommel in passing, acknowledging his tactical skill, but he never reflected on his death. He was never asked. He never wrote about it. Patton died in December 1945, just over a year later, in a car accident in Germany, ironically, the same way Rommel was said to have died. The silence remained unbroken, and in that silence, history leaves us with its answer.